Maya Redhawk stood at the edge of the red cliff and looked at the strange sky above her new home. She was 23 years old with long black hair and dark eyes that seemed to see things others could not. Her grandmother had raised her with the old Apache ways, teaching her to listen to the land and respect all living things. Now they lived on a planet far from Earth, a world humans called New Arizona because of its red soil and harsh weather. The colony of Redstone Valley had 300 people living under protective domes, trying to survive on this alien world that did not want them there. Maya wore her grandmother's turquoise necklace from Earth and boots made for walking on poisonous plants. She carried tools on her belt but trusted her instincts more than machines. While other colonists saw rocks and dirt to mine and conquer, Maya felt something else. This planet was alive in ways they did not understand. It breathed and moved and sang songs through crystal formations that grew deep in the ground. She had tried to tell the colony leaders about this, but most of them thought she was being foolish, or letting her heritage cloud her scientific training. The ground had been shaking for 3 weeks now. Small tremors at first, then larger ones that made the dome structures rattle and people nervous. The colony council called emergency meetings and demanded solutions. They sent out teams to study the problem with their scanners and computers, but none of them found answers that made sense. The data showed random geological activity, nothing more. But Maya knew better. She had been tracking the tremors on her own, comparing them to patterns her grandmother taught her to recognize in nature. The shaking was not random at all. It followed a rhythm, like a heartbeat that was getting faster and more desperate. Maya walked back toward the main dome as the sun set on the horizon. This planet had 3 moons that rose at different times, casting strange shadows across the landscape. She passed by gardens where earth crops struggled to grow in alien soil, past the mining equipment that dug deeper into the planet every day, past the housing units where families tried to build normal lives in an abnormal place. Everyone was scared, though most tried to hide it. If the tremors got worse, they might have to evacuate and abandon everything they had built over 5 years. Inside the main dome, people gathered in small groups talking in worried voices. Maya saw the 12 men who ran most of the colony's important operations. They were the warriors, the leaders, the ones everyone looked to when trouble came. Danny Pierce headed security with his military background and serious face. Carlos Mendoza kept all the machines running with his engineering genius. Jake Morrison grew the food, and his brother Luke flew the transport ships. Henry Cross ran the mines that brought up valuable minerals to send back to Earth. Kyle Brennan managed the water systems that kept everyone alive. Dr. Seth Warner healed the sick and injured in the medical center. Patrick Hayes controlled all communications with Earth and other colonies. Vincent Cole protected them from dangerous native creatures. Alex Turner kept the power flowing. Gary Stone led exploration teams into unknown territory. These 11 men had been with the colony from the beginning or close to it. They were respected and admired. They were also all interested in Maya, though they showed it in different ways. Some brought her gifts, others sought her advice on problems. A few simply watched her from across rooms with hopeful eyes. Maya was kind to all of them but gave her heart to none. There was something missing in each of them, some quality she needed but could not name. The 12th man was different from the others. His name was Nathan Brooks, and he had arrived only 6 months ago on a supply ship. Nobody knew much about his past because he did not talk about it. He worked on the colony's outer edge, fixing broken equipment and reinforcing structures that needed repair. He lived in a small unit by himself and seemed content with solitude. The other 11 men looked down on him as an outsider and a drifter, someone with no ambition or importance. They could not understand why Maya often walked out to where Nathan worked, or why she smiled when talking to him in ways she never smiled for them. Nathan had gray eyes that seemed older than his 30 years. He moved quietly and spoke less, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. He had been to many places and seen many things, though he kept those stories to himself. Maya sensed in him a quality the others lacked. He did not try to control or conquer. He observed and adapted. He listened more than he talked. There was a stillness in him that reminded her of her grandmother's teachings about finding peace in understanding rather than domination. That evening, Maya requested a council meeting for the next day. She had spent weeks studying the tremors and had conclusions to share. Administrator Margaret Chen approved the meeting and sent notices to all department heads. The 12 warriors would attend, along with other colony leaders. Maya prepared her presentation, knowing most would resist her findings. The data was clear to her but would sound impossible to minds trained only in conventional science. She would tell them the truth anyway. The planet was not just geologically active. It was responding to them, reacting to the damage they caused, trying to make them stop or leave. As Maya worked late organizing her research, Nathan appeared at her door with 2 cups of tea made from plants he had learned to cultivate. He did not ask what she was working on or offer unwanted advice. He simply sat with her in comfortable silence, being present without demanding anything in return. This was why her heart had already chosen him, though she had not spoken it aloud. In a colony full of men who wanted to prove themselves and win her admiration through grand gestures and displays of strength, Nathan understood something far more important. Sometimes the bravest thing was not to fight but to surrender, not to speak but to listen, not to conquer but to coexist. The tremors continued through the night, growing slightly stronger as if the planet knew tomorrow would bring confrontation. The council chamber filled with people the next morning. The 12 warriors sat in the front row, each carrying the confidence of men used to solving problems with skill and technology. Administrator Margaret Chen opened the meeting and gave Maya the floor. Maya stood before the holographic display and brought up her data. Charts and graphs floated in the air showing seismic patterns over the past 3 weeks. To most eyes, they looked like random spikes and valleys. Maya saw something else entirely. She began her explanation carefully, knowing she had to bridge 2 ways of understanding. Her scientific training gave her the language they would accept, but her grandmother's teachings gave her the truth behind the numbers. The tremors followed patterns that repeated with slight variations like music or language. They responded to specific activities in the colony, particularly mining operations. Every time drills went deep into certain areas, the tremors increased in frequency and intensity. Every time mining stopped for maintenance or shift changes, the tremors decreased. This was not coincidence or random geological processes. This was response and reaction. Maya pulled up a 3-dimensional model of the planet's crust beneath the colony. She had spent countless hours building this model from scan data, comparing it to natural patterns she knew from Earth. What she found was remarkable and terrifying. The valuable minerals they mined were not scattered randomly through the rock. They formed networks, branching pathways that connected across vast distances. These networks were made of crystalline structures that conducted electromagnetic energy. In essence, the entire crust of the planet was one giant distributed nervous system. The minerals they were extracting were not just resources. They were parts of something alive, or at least conscious in ways humans did not recognize. The room erupted in arguments before she finished speaking. Henry Cross stood up, his face red with anger or embarrassment. He said Maya was letting superstition override science, that she was anthropomorphizing natural geological formations, that her heritage was making her see spirits where only rocks existed. Others joined in with similar objections. How could minerals be alive? How could rock think or feel? The idea was absurd, primitive, unscientific. They had run every test and scan available. Nothing suggested consciousness or intelligence. Nothing except the patterns Maya saw, patterns they dismissed as coincidence or selective interpretation. Danny Pierce tried to be diplomatic. He acknowledged Maya's concerns but questioned her conclusions. Even if the patterns were real, there could be conventional explanations they had not yet discovered. They should run more tests, gather more data, not jump to impossible conclusions based on insufficient evidence. Carlos Mendoza agreed, suggesting the electromagnetic patterns might be natural resonance, like how crystals vibrate at certain frequencies. Nothing mysterious or alive, just physics they did not fully understand yet. Jake Morrison took a different approach. He said even if Maya was right, even if the planet had some form of awareness, the colony could not simply stop mining. 300 people depended on those minerals. Earth Command expected regular shipments. Their funding, their supplies, their very survival depended on meeting quotas and maintaining production. They could not base critical decisions on theories about conscious rocks. The stakes were too high, the evidence too uncertain. Maya listened to all the objections without responding emotionally. She had expected this resistance. People believe what they need to believe, and the colony needed to believe they had the right to take what they wanted from this world. Accepting her theory meant accepting guilt, accepting that they were causing harm, accepting that they might need to change everything about how they operated. That was too much for most of them to consider seriously. Only 2 people in the room did not argue or dismiss her findings. Administrator Chen sat quietly, her expression thoughtful rather than hostile. She had lived long enough to know that impossible things sometimes turned out to be true, that indigenous knowledge often contained wisdom. Science took decades to rediscover. She did not commit to believing Maya, but she did not reject her either. She simply listened with an open mind. The other person was Nathan Brooks. He sat in the back of the room, away from the important people in their important seats. He watched Maya with those calm gray eyes and nodded slightly when she looked his way. After the meeting dissolved into chaos with everyone talking over everyone else, after Administrator Chen called for order and suggested they table the discussion until more research could be done, after the warriors filed out arguing among themselves about proper responses and scientific methodology, Nathan waited. He found Maya outside the chamber, sitting on a bench under the artificial sky of the dome. She looked tired and discouraged. Nathan sat beside her without speaking immediately. They watched colonists walk past, going about their daily routines, unaware that the ground beneath them might be something they should respect rather than exploit. Finally, Nathan spoke in his quiet way. He told Maya he believed her. He had spent 6 months maintaining sensor equipment on the colony's outer edges, working alone in places where the hum of machinery did not drown out subtler sounds. He had felt the vibrations in the ground, had noticed how they changed in response to human activity, had wondered if anyone else was paying attention. When Maya presented her findings, everything clicked into place for him. She was right, he was certain. The planet was aware and increasingly distressed by their presence. Maya asked why he believed her when trained scientists with years of education dismissed her theory. Nathan smiled slightly and said, "Education sometimes taught people what to think rather than how to think." He had learned through experience that the universe was stranger and more alive than most humans wanted to admit. He had seen things on other worlds, met people from other cultures, learned that there were many ways to understand reality. The Western scientific method was powerful but not complete. It excelled at measuring and quantifying, but often missed qualities that could not be reduced to numbers. Maya felt something shift inside her chest. Here was someone who understood not just her theory but the worldview behind it, someone who respected different ways of knowing, someone humble enough to admit uncertainty, and brave enough to trust intuition alongside data. She had been surrounded by warriors all her adult life, men who solved problems with strength and determination. Nathan was something else entirely. He was a listener, a learner, someone who adapted rather than dominated. In a colony built on conquest, he offered coexistence. In a culture that valued certainty, he offered wisdom. The next day, the 12 warriors gathered without Maya to discuss what they called the crisis. They met in Danny Pierce's office, a room decorated with commendations and photos from his military service. The men sat in chairs around a conference table, their faces serious. They had a problem, or rather 2 problems. First, the tremors were getting worse and threatening the colony's survival. Second, Maya Redhawk had presented a theory so radical it could undermine everything they had built if people started believing it. They needed to solve the geological problem and prove Maya wrong, or at least prove there were better explanations. Henry Cross spoke first with barely controlled frustration. He said they could not let one person's superstitious beliefs shut down mining operations. Too much was at stake. He proposed increasing mining in areas that showed less seismic activity, concentrating their efforts where the crystal networks were less dense. If Maya was right about the networks, then avoiding the biggest concentration should reduce the planet's reaction. If she was wrong, then this approach would at least maintain production while they figured out what was really happening. Carlos Mendoza disagreed. He thought they should develop better technology, more precise drilling methods that could extract minerals without damaging surrounding structures. He proposed spending 2 weeks designing and building specialized equipment that used sonic frequencies instead of mechanical force. This approach would test Maya's theory scientifically. If gentler extraction methods reduced the tremors, that would support her claims. If they made no difference, they could dismiss her concerns and continue normal operations. Jake Morrison suggested the solution might be biological rather than geological. Perhaps the crystal networks were connected to the planet's ecosystem in ways their scans had not detected. He wanted permission to run comprehensive studies of local flora and fauna, looking for electromagnetic connections to the underground structures. His brother Luke offered to conduct aerial surveys with enhanced sensors, mapping the crystal networks from above to find patterns they might have missed from ground level. The other warriors added their own proposals. Dr. Seth Warner wanted to study crystal samples at the molecular level to understand their composition better. Patrick Hayes believed he could decode the electromagnetic patterns as a form of communication, treating them like signals rather than random noise. Vincent Cole suggested setting up resonance dampeners around the colony to counteract whatever frequencies were causing instability. Alex Turner proposed adjusting the power grid's output to avoid interfering with natural electromagnetic fields. Gary Stone wanted to organize expeditions to map the entire region, identifying safe zones where future expansion could occur without triggering reactions. Each man believed his approach was best. Each wanted to be the one who solved the crisis and saved the colony. Each was also aware that success would make him a hero and likely win Maya's admiration. They were competitors as much as colleagues, warriors fighting for glory as much as solutions. Their rivalry had always existed beneath a surface of professional cooperation, but now it emerged openly. They argued about whose plan made most sense, whose expertise was most relevant, who should lead the effort. Danny Pierce finally called for order. He proposed they stop arguing and start acting. Each man would pursue his own solution. They would give themselves 2 weeks. Whoever succeeded in reducing the tremors would be recognized as the colony's savior and given authority to implement long-term solutions. The others agreed, some reluctantly, seeing it as the only way forward when consensus was impossible. They would compete, but at least they would all be working toward the same goal. What none of them discussed was Nathan Brooks. The outsider was beneath their notice, unworthy of inclusion in their plans. He had no expertise in geology or engineering or any of the specialized fields needed to solve this crisis. He was just a maintenance worker who fixed broken equipment and kept to himself. The fact that Maya spent time with him was puzzling but irrelevant to the serious work ahead. When they succeeded, Maya would see who the real men were, who deserved her respect and affection. The warriors dispersed to begin their expeditions and experiments. Each assembled teams and equipment, requisitioned supplies and vehicles, made plans and schedules. The colony buzzed with activity as 12 different approaches to the same problem mobilized simultaneously. Administrator Chen authorized the efforts, hoping at least one would work. She also quietly authorized something else. She gave Nathan Brooks access to colony resources and permission to conduct his own investigation if he wished. She did not announce this decision to the warriors or anyone else. She simply filed the authorization in the system and waited to see what would happen. Nathan found out that evening when Maya told him. She had been in Chen's office earlier, arguing that Nathan should be included in the search for solutions. Chen had listened and agreed, but suggested keeping it quiet to avoid conflict with the other men. Maya asked Nathan what he planned to do. Nathan said he did not know yet. He needed to understand the situation better before proposing solutions. Unlike the warriors who had immediately jumped to action, Nathan wanted to observe and learn first. Maya offered to show him what she had discovered in her studies. Nathan accepted, and they spent 3 days going through her data together. Nathan asked questions that revealed how he thought. He did not challenge her conclusions or offer alternative explanations. Instead, he tried to understand how she had arrived at her insights, what patterns she was seeing, what intuitions guided her interpretation. He treated her knowledge with respect, never suggesting that his perspective was superior or that scientific training mattered more than indigenous wisdom. On the 4th day, Nathan made a suggestion that surprised Maya. He said they should go out into the wilderness beyond the colony's protective perimeter. They should find the crystal formations and spend time with them, not studying them as objects but experiencing them as subjects. If the planet was truly aware, truly capable of response and communication, then the answer would not be found in labs and computer models. It would be found in relationship, in presence, in the willingness to listen before speaking. Maya felt her heart beat faster. This was exactly what her grandmother would have advised. Go to the source, show respect, establish connection. It was the old way, the Apache way, The way that recognized all things as alive and deserving of consideration. She agreed immediately. They would need supplies and equipment, but they would travel light and stay flexible. Unlike the warriors with their teams and machines and predetermined plans, they would go as humble seekers, ready to learn whatever the planet wanted to teach them. Maya and Nathan walked across the red plains as the sun rose behind them. They each carried a backpack with water, food concentrates, basic medical supplies, sleeping bags, and portable shelters. Nathan had a scanner that could detect electromagnetic patterns and measure seismic activity. Maya had her grandmother's necklace and a small pouch of cornmeal from Earth, sacred and precious. They wore environmental suits that protected them from the planet's toxic atmosphere, while allowing freedom of movement. The landscape was beautiful in its strangeness. Red rock formations rose like sculptures carved by wind that blew differently than earth wind. Plants grew in twisted shapes, something between coral and cactus, colored in purples and greens that seemed too bright. Small creatures moved in the shadows, native life forms that studied the humans with as much curiosity as the humans studied them. The sky was orange during the day, shifting to purple at night, never quite the blue that humans instinctively expected. Maya led them toward a region where her scans had shown dense crystal networks. It was 2 days' walk from the colony, far enough that no mining operations had reached it yet. The ground vibrated beneath their feet with that strange, almost heartbeat rhythm Nathan had learned to feel. It grew stronger as they traveled, not threatening but present, like walking on the chest of a sleeping giant. They did not talk much, saving energy for the journey and comfortable enough with each other that silence felt natural rather than awkward. On the first night, they camped beside a formation of crystals that jutted from the ground like frozen lightning. The crystals were 6 feet tall and clustered in groups of 5 or 7, never even numbers. As darkness fell and the 3 moons rose one after another, the crystals began to glow faintly and hum with a low frequency that Maya felt in her bones. She sat cross-legged near the largest crystal and closed her eyes, breathing slowly, opening herself to whatever the planet wanted to communicate. Nathan sat beside her, not meditating but present, keeping watch in a protective way that did not assume danger but prepared for it anyway. The humming changed pitch subtly throughout the night, rising and falling in patterns that almost seemed like music. Maya thought about her grandmother's stories of sacred places on Earth where the land sang to those who knew how to listen. She thought about how humans had left Earth partly because they had damaged it so badly, yet were now doing the same thing on new worlds. She thought about what it meant to be indigenous to a place, to belong somewhere, to have relationship rather than ownership. She wondered if humans could ever learn that lesson, or if they were doomed to be perpetual invaders, taking and taking until nothing was left. Nathan's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He was looking at his scanner, his face puzzled. The electromagnetic readings were changing in response to their presence, not in a threatening way, but more like curiosity, like the planet was examining them. The patterns flowing through the crystals had shifted when they arrived, and continued adjusting as if trying to find a frequency that matched or resonated with the humans. Nathan showed Maya the readings. She had seen similar patterns in her data back at the colony, but here in the presence of the crystals themselves, the meaning felt clearer. They were being acknowledged. The planet knew they were there and was paying attention to them. Maya felt tears surprise her. After weeks of trying to convince people that this world was aware, here was evidence she could feel in her body and see on instruments. She was not crazy or superstitious or letting her heritage override her reason. She was right, and the planet was confirming it in the gentlest possible way. She turned to Nathan and saw understanding in his eyes. He felt it too. They were not alone on this expedition. They were in conversation, however strange that conversation might be. The second day took them deeper into the wilderness. They followed a trail that animals had made, small hoofed creatures that browsed on the purple plants. The trail wound between rock formations and across dried stream beds, eventually leading to a place that made both humans stop in wonder. Before them was a waterfall, but the liquid falling was not quite water. It shimmered with dissolved minerals that caught the light and threw rainbows. Behind the waterfall was a cave entrance, almost hidden, easily missed by anyone not following this specific path. Maya and Nathan looked at each other without needing to speak. This was where they needed to go. They checked their environmental seals, adjusted their lights, and stepped through the waterfall into the cave. The passage was narrow at first, forcing them to walk single file with their hands on the walls for balance. Then it opened suddenly into a cavern so vast their lights could not reach the far walls or ceiling. What they could see took their breath away. Crystals filled the cavern, not small formations like the ones they had camped beside, but structures the size of buildings, growing in impossible geometries that seemed to defy gravity and logic. They spiraled and branched and interconnected in 3 dimensions, creating an architecture of pure mineral that was somehow more beautiful than anything humans had designed. Light from Maya and Nathan's lamps reflected and refracted through the crystals, multiplying and splitting into cascades of rainbow colors that danced across surfaces like living things. More important than the beauty was the presence. If the crystals outside had felt aware, these felt conscious in a way that was almost overwhelming. The humming here was louder, more complex, layered with harmonics and overtones that created chords without source instruments. The vibration moved through the floor and walls and air itself, surrounding the humans in sensation that was part sound, part feeling, part something neither had words for. Nathan's scanner went wild with readings. Maya's grandmother's necklace vibrated against her chest. They stood in the entrance to the cavern, small and humble before something vast. Nathan spoke quietly, almost whispering. He said this was a cathedral, not a place humans had built, but a place that deserved the same reverence. Maya agreed. She felt the same holy quality her grandmother had described in sacred mountains and ancient forests. This was a place of power, but not power humans could use or control. This was power that simply was, eternal and patient and completely indifferent to human needs, yet somehow not hostile to human presence. They had been allowed to enter. That felt like a gift. Maya and Nathan set up their camp just inside the cavern entrance, where fresh air from outside mixed with the mineral-rich atmosphere of the interior. They did not venture deep into the crystal structures immediately. Instead, they waited and watched and listened, letting the place accept their presence without demanding anything in return. This patience was something Nathan had learned in his travels, and Maya had learned from her grandmother. Sacred places revealed themselves only to those who showed proper respect. On the first day, they mapped the cavern's entrance area using Nathan's scanner. The readings were unlike anything in the colony's database. The crystals were not just conducting electromagnetic energy, they were generating it through some process the scanner could not fully explain. The formations pulsed with rhythms that synchronized across the entire cavern, sometimes matching perfectly, sometimes creating complex polyrhythms that wove together like a composition. Temperature variations in different areas corresponded to changes in the electromagnetic patterns, suggesting the whole system was thermodynamic as well as electrical. Maya took careful samples from crystals that had naturally broken pieces lying at their base. She would not damage the living formations, but these fragments could be studied without causing harm. She also took out her grandmother's cornmeal and performed a small ceremony, sprinkling the sacred substance in a circle around their camp while speaking words in Apache. She translated for Nathan afterward, explaining that she was introducing herself to the spirits of this place, asking permission to be here, offering gratitude for the welcome. Nathan did not laugh or question the ritual. He simply bowed his head and added his own silent acknowledgement, respecting forms he did not fully understand because he understood that respect itself was what mattered. On the second day, they went deeper into the cavern. They moved slowly and carefully, conscious that one misstep could damage formations that had taken millennia to grow. The crystals created passages and chambers, almost like rooms in a house, but organic in design. Some chambers were small and intimate, others vast as auditoriums. The light from their lamps played tricks with distance and depth, making it hard to judge sizes accurately. Sound behaved strangely too, sometimes echoing in ways that should not be possible, sometimes dampening until even their breathing seemed muted. In the deepest chamber they reached, Nathan placed his gloved hand against a crystal surface. Through the environmental suit, he could not feel texture or temperature directly, but he could feel vibration. The crystal's pulse was slow and steady, powerful like a heartbeat but measured in minutes rather than seconds. He closed his eyes and tried to empty his mind, to simply receive whatever information the crystal might be offering. Maya watched him for a long moment, then placed her own hand against the same crystal. Their hands were inches apart, connected through the mineral between them. Something happened that neither could explain fully afterward. A sensation moved through them, not painful but intense like electricity but gentler. Images flickered behind their closed eyes. Not pictures exactly, but impressions. Fast time stretching back millions of years. Slow growth in darkness and pressure. Gradual awareness emerging from repetition and pattern. Connections spreading through the planetary crust like neurons forming networks. Something that was not alive in the biological sense but was conscious in some other way. Some way humans had no framework to understand. And recent disturbance. Recent pain. Recent confusion about the small hot creatures that dug and drilled and took pieces away. The sensation faded after what might have been seconds or minutes. Time felt strange in the crystal cathedral. Maya and Nathan removed their hands from the crystal and looked at each other. Nathan asked if Maya had experienced the same thing. Maya nodded slowly. She said it felt like memory, like the planet was sharing its history, not in words or even concepts, but in pure experience translated imperfectly into something human minds could partially grasp. The planet was old and the colony was new. The planet was patient and the humans were urgent. The planet was trying to understand why the small hot creatures caused damage and whether they could be taught to stop. Maya felt certainty settle into her bones. The planet was not hostile. It was confused and hurt but not malicious. It had been trying to communicate all along. The tremors were not attacks. They were questions, requests, pleas. The equivalent of pulling away from pain. Asking something to stop hurting you when you had no words the other being could understand. The planet had been showing remarkable restraint, actually. If it wanted to destroy the colony, it probably could. Instead, it had been shaking the ground just enough to get attention, trying everything it knew to make the humans understand. Nathan checked his scanner readings. The cavern's electromagnetic patterns had changed during their contact with the crystal. The pulses had become more organized, more regular, almost expectant. Nathan said it felt like the planet was waiting for response, waiting to see if the humans had finally understood the message. Maya agreed. This was a moment of potential connection. The first real communication between species so different they shared almost nothing in common except existence on the same world. The question was what to do with this opportunity. Maya made a decision. She pulled out her scanner and began recording specific electromagnetic patterns. She was not scientist enough to fully decode what the patterns meant, but she could document them carefully. When they returned to the colony, she would work with Patrick Hayes to analyze the recordings and develop a system for responding. If the planet was trying to talk, humans needed to learn its language. More immediately, she needed to acknowledge what had just happened, to let the planet know its message had been received even if not fully understood. She spoke aloud in Apache, then in English addressing the crystals around them. She said humans were sorry for causing pain. She said they did not understand at first that the planet was aware. She said they would try to do better, to take less and give back more, to live as guests rather than conquerors. She said she would carry this message back to her people and do everything she could to change how the colony operated. She asked for patience and forgiveness and the chance to prove humans could learn. Nathan added his own words. He spoke simply and directly, admitting ignorance and requesting guidance. He said not all humans were destructive by nature. Some could adapt and coexist. He promised to help Maya convince the colony to change its ways. He asked the planet to judge them by their future actions rather than past mistakes. He said he hoped for relationship rather than conflict. The crystals pulsed once, strongly, a wave of sensation that moved through the entire cavern. Then they settled into a new rhythm, slower and calmer than before. To Maya and Nathan it felt like acceptance, or at least willingness to wait and see. The planet had given them a chance. Now they had to prove themselves worthy of it. They stayed in the cavern one more night, sleeping fitfully with dreams full of crystal harmonics and ancient patience. In the morning they began the long walk back to Redstone Valley. The colony was in chaos when Maya and Nathan returned 6 days after they had left. The 12 warriors had all been conducting their expeditions simultaneously, and the results had been spectacular failures. Danny Pierce's seismic charges had triggered a massive tremor that nearly collapsed Dome 3, where most families lived. Emergency teams had to evacuate 200 people in the middle of the night, while structural engineers frantically reinforced the support systems. The dome held, but the scare left everyone shaken. Carlos Mendoza's sonic drilling equipment had malfunctioned in ways his team did not anticipate. Instead of gently extracting minerals, the sonic frequencies had amplified the crystal network's natural resonance, causing a feedback loop that overloaded electrical systems throughout the colony. The power flickered on and off for 2 days while Alex Turner and his teams worked around the clock to isolate the problem and repair damaged circuits. Life support never failed completely, but it came close enough that Administrator Chen nearly ordered evacuation. Jake Morrison had discovered that the planet's native plants were indeed connected to the crystal networks through their root systems, which contained metallic threads that conducted electromagnetic signals. This was fascinating scientifically but useless practically. When his team tried to harvest some plants for study, every plant within 100 meters wilted simultaneously, as if in coordinated response. The reaction proved Maya's theory about planetary awareness but also demonstrated how interconnected everything was. Disturbing any part of the ecosystem affected the whole. Luke Morrison's aerial survey had been cut short when his craft suddenly lost power mid-flight and dropped from the sky like a stone. He managed to crash land with only minor damage to himself and the vehicle, but the incident was terrifying. Review of the scanner data showed an intense electromagnetic pulse had emanated from the ground directly below his flight path, perfectly timed to disable his engines. Coincidence seemed unlikely. The planet had actively defended itself against surveillance. Henry Cross had suffered the worst fate. His team was drilling in what they thought was a safe zone, far from any area Maya had flagged as sensitive. They went deep, chasing a rich mineral vein going deeper than anyone had drilled before. At 2,000 meters, the drill broke through into a void, a natural cavity in the crust. Gases erupted from the hole under intense pressure, toxic and flammable. The drilling rig exploded. 3 workers died instantly. Henry and 2 others survived only because they happened to be in a shielded control cabin. The mine was now sealed and condemned, the bodies left buried because recovery was impossible. The other warriors had met with lesser but still significant disasters. Kyle Brennan's water pressure experiments had caused a geyser that flooded the agricultural section, destroying weeks of crops. Dr. Seth Warner's molecular studies had yielded interesting data but no solutions. Patrick Hayes had detected patterns in the electromagnetic signals, but could not decode them without more information. Vincent Cole's resonance dampeners had somehow made the tremors worse rather than better. Gary Stone's exploration teams had been forced to turn back when every path they tried became impassable, blocked by rock slides and structural failures that seemed to occur just ahead of wherever they walked. The colony was terrified and angry. 11 expeditions had failed and 5 people were dead. The tremors were worse than ever, occurring every few hours now with intensity that made everyone fear the domes would fail. Administrator Chen had drafted evacuation orders and sent urgent requests to Earth Command for emergency transport. If the situation did not improve within 1 week, they would abandon Redstone Valley and lose everything. 5 years of work, billions in investment, 300 people's homes and hopes, all would be surrendered to a planet that did not want humans there. Into this disaster walked Maya and Nathan, dusty and exhausted from their journey, but calm in ways that stood out against the colony's panic. They went directly to Administrator Chen's office and requested an immediate council meeting. Chen, desperate for any solution, agreed instantly. Within 2 hours, everyone who mattered was assembled in the council chamber. The 12 warriors sat in the front row, battered and humiliated by their failures. Behind them sat department heads, senior staff, and family representatives. The room was packed with people seeking answers. Maya stood before them and told the truth simply. The planet was conscious, not in human ways or even biological ways, but conscious nonetheless through its crystal networks. The mining operations had been causing it pain, and the tremors were defensive responses, attempts to communicate distress. The planet had been remarkably gentle, actually, considering what it could do if it chose violence over communication. Every disaster that had befallen the warriors' expeditions had been the planet defending itself, teaching humans that force would be met with force. That domination was not acceptable. She presented her scanner recordings from the crystal cavern, showing the organized patterns she and Nathan had documented. She described their experience touching the crystals, the sense of ancient awareness and recent confusion. She explained that the planet had given them a message, a warning, but also an invitation. Humans could stay if they learned to coexist. They had to stop treating the planet as dead matter to be exploited and start treating it as a living partner to be respected. The room erupted predictably. Henry Cross, still grieving his dead workers, shouted that Maya's theories had killed those men. If she had not planted these ideas about planetary consciousness, they would have continued normal operations safely. The disasters had happened because people became cautious and uncertain, trying untested methods instead of proven procedures. Danny Pierce argued that even if the planet was aware, humans still needed resources to survive. They could not simply stop mining and expect Earth Command to keep supporting them. The colony had to be economically viable or it would be shut down regardless of philosophical concerns. Other voices joined the chaos. Some demanded Maya be removed from any advisory position for spreading dangerous ideas. Others suggested the planet's hostility proved humans should leave, that this world was too dangerous to colonize. A few supported Maya but had no idea what practical steps to take. Administrator Chen struggled to maintain order as the meeting devolved into shouting matches and accusations. Nathan Brooks stood up. He did not raise his voice, but somehow his quiet presence commanded attention. People stopped shouting and looked at him, this outsider who had no official position or authority. Nathan said simply that they had a choice. They could continue fighting the planet and lose, or they could try something humanity had rarely attempted: surrender. Not surrender meaning defeat, but surrender meaning acceptance. Accept that they were guests on someone else's world. Accept that their survival depended on permission, not power. Accept that the old ways of conquest and exploitation would not work here. He proposed a test. Let him and Maya work with Patrick Hayes to develop a communication system based on the electromagnetic patterns they had recorded. Give them 2 weeks to establish dialogue with the planetary intelligence. If they succeeded in reducing the tremors, the colony would adopt a completely new approach to resource extraction. If they failed, Administrator Chen could proceed with evacuation. The colony had nothing to lose by trying, since evacuation was already being planned. The 12 warriors began to object, but Administrator Chen raised her hand for silence. She looked at Nathan for a long moment, then at Maya, then at the disaster reports piled on her desk. She made her decision with the certainty of someone who had run out of better options. She gave Nathan and Maya 2 weeks. In the meantime, all mining operations would cease completely. The colony would survive on reserves and hope that stopping the damage would buy them goodwill with whatever consciousness lived beneath their feet. If the tremors did not improve, evacuation would proceed as scheduled. If they did improve, humanity would have learned something precious: how to be a good neighbor. 6 months after the communication breakthrough, Redstone Valley was unrecognizable in philosophy, though familiar in appearance. The domes still stood, the equipment still functioned, 300 people still lived their daily lives. But everything was different underneath the surface details. The colony had transformed from an extractive outpost into something unprecedented in human history, a true partnership between species. Maya and Nathan were recognized as the architects of this transformation, though they both insisted the credit belonged to everyone who had been willing to change. Administrator Chen appointed them as co-directors of a new department called Indigenous Relations, tasked with maintaining communication with the planetary consciousness and developing protocols for sustainable coexistence. The title was imperfect because the planet was not exactly indigenous, having evolved here rather than arriving from elsewhere, but it captured the spirit of treating this world and its awareness with the respect due to the original inhabitants. Patrick Hayes continued his work decoding the electromagnetic language, making slow but steady progress. The vocabulary now included several dozen patterns with reasonably confident meanings. They could express basic concepts like greeting, gratitude, request, denial, warning, and acceptance. More complex ideas remained beyond reach, but even simple communication was miraculous. Humans could ask permission to collect resources in specific locations and receive clear answers. They could warn the planet before conducting activities that might be disruptive. They could even tentatively express appreciation and receive what seemed like reciprocal positive regard. The planet's responses suggested it was learning to understand humans, just as humans learned to understand it. The tremors became a form of communication rather than threat. A gentle vibration might indicate interest or attention. A sharper shake could mean caution or concern. The planetary consciousness was adapting its expression to meet human comprehension, showing remarkable flexibility for an intelligence billions of years old. Maya often wondered what it thought of them, these brief, loud creatures who had arrived suddenly and caused such disruption before learning manners. She hoped it saw them as children learn to be better. The crystal fragments collected from the caverns provided enough raw materials to keep the colony functioning. The minerals were exactly what Earth Command required, identical in composition to what deep mining had extracted but obtained ethically. The collection process was slower than drilling had been, requiring patience and careful negotiation for each harvest. But it was sustainable, and it maintained the relationship that had become more valuable than any mineral deposit. Other colonies in the sector were beginning to hear about Redstone Valley's success, and some were requesting advice on how to implement similar approaches on their worlds. Jake Morrison's agricultural experiments bore fruit literally and figuratively. Several native plant species proved edible to humans after proper preparation, providing food variety beyond Earth crops. The plants grown in restored mining areas thrived, their roots reconnecting damaged sections of the crystal network. The planet seemed to respond positively to this healing work, becoming more communicative and cooperative with each repaired connection. Gardens appeared throughout the colony, mixing Earth and native species, green spaces that reminded everyone they lived in partnership with a living world. The 12 warriors had found redemption through service. They worked together now without rivalry, their various expertise combining into effective teams. Danny Pierce's security forces became Ranger Guardians, beloved by colonists for keeping everyone safe while respecting planetary boundaries. Carlos Mendoza's engineering innovations focused on sustainable technology that complemented rather than dominated natural systems. The Morrison brothers collaborated on projects combining agriculture and transportation, creating networks that supported both human and planetary health. Henry Cross had taken his grief and transformed it into purpose. The memorial gardens he established became places of beauty and healing, where colonists went to remember their dead and commit to better futures. The 3 workers who died in the mining disaster were honored by the restoration their deaths had inspired. Henry spent his days tending these gardens, working with soil and plants, finding peace in cultivation rather than extraction. His hands, once used to control and conquer, now nurtured and cared. The other warriors each found their place. Kyle Brennan's water systems became models of efficiency and respect for natural flow. Dr. Seth Warner's medical center began incorporating native plants into treatments, creating new pharmaceutical possibilities. Vincent Cole, Alex Turner, and Gary Stone applied their skills to maintaining the delicate balance between human needs and planetary health. They were no longer conquerors but caretakers, no longer warriors but wisdom keepers. And through all of this, Maya and Nathan became the heart of the colony, in ways that had nothing to do with official titles. People came to them for guidance not because they were authorities, but because they embodied the principles Redstone Valley now lived by. They showed by example how to listen before acting, how to respect what you did not fully understand, how to adapt rather than dominate. Their relationship became a model for the colony's relationship with the planet, based on mutual respect, open communication, and genuine care for the other's well-being. One evening, Maya and Nathan stood again at the edge of the mesa, where Maya had spent so many hours before everything changed. The sun set on the horizon, painting the red rocks in deeper shades of crimson and gold. The colony glowed behind them, no longer an intrusion on the landscape but part of it. The 3 moons began their slow rise, and across the valley crystal formations caught the light and sang their ancient songs. Nathan spoke quietly, his voice carrying just far enough for Maya to hear. He asked if she ever regretted choosing him over the others, over men with more status and certainty and conventional success. Maya laughed, and the sound was pure joy. She said she had not chosen him despite his lack of those things, but because of it. The lone cowboy had nothing to prove, no need to conquer or control. He understood that strength came from yielding, that wisdom came from questions, that success came from serving something larger than yourself. She said the 12 warriors had fought for her heart with grand gestures and displays of prowess, but Nathan had won it by sitting quietly beside her in a crystal cavern and simply being present. He had won it by trusting her knowledge and respecting her heritage. He had won it by showing humanity at its best, humble, adaptive, capable of learning. She chose him because he represented the kind of human who could survive in the cosmos, not by conquering new worlds, but by joining them. Nathan took her hand and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the purple sky. Redstone Valley had become something unprecedented, A human colony that thrived by listening rather than taking, by adapting rather than dominating, by surrendering the old ways of frontier conquest for new ways of interstellar citizenship. It had started with one woman who trusted indigenous wisdom, and one man who understood that not every problem required force. It had grown through the hard lessons of disaster and the humble work of restoration. It had succeeded because enough people were willing to change. Other colonies were already implementing Redstone Valley's model. Earth Command, initially skeptical, was now actively promoting the approach as best practice for planetary settlement. Academic papers were being written, documentaries were being filmed, and Maya and Nathan found themselves reluctant celebrities, spokespeople for a new philosophy of human expansion into the cosmos. They deflected attention when they could, insisting the credit belonged to everyone who had been brave enough to surrender old certainties for new possibilities. But in quiet moments like this, standing together on the edge of twilight with an alien world singing beneath their feet, they knew the truth. Change had begun with choice. Maya had chosen Nathan not because he was the strongest or smartest or most accomplished, but because he was the wisest. And wisdom, in the end, was what humanity needed most as it ventured into a universe far stranger and more alive than anyone had imagined. The crystal formations pulsed with their slow electromagnetic heartbeat, a rhythm that matched the pulse in Maya's wrist and the steady calm of Nathan's breathing. Human and planet, learning to exist together, learning to speak languages neither had known before, learning that consciousness took many forms, and all deserved respect. This was the future if humanity could remember the lessons learned in Redstone Valley. This was survival if humans could carry forward the humility earned through disaster and redeemed through effort. Maya leaned against Nathan's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her. Behind them, the colony continued its evening routines. Children played in the gardens where damaged land had been healed. Scientists analyzed data from the crystal networks, always learning something new. Engineers maintained systems that worked with the planet rather than against it. Families shared meals and stories, building lives on a world that had accepted them after they learned to ask permission. 300 humans and one planetary consciousness, coexisting in relationship rather than conquest.